at 9:44 a.m., October 7th, 1944. 31,000 feet above the Saale River Valley, central Germany. First Lieutenant Thomas Andrew Gallagher, 24 years old, from Bridgeport, Connecticut, has completed 41 combat missions. He is flying a P-51D Mustang he has named Irish Rose, a name painted in white cursive letters just below the cockpit rail, small enough that you have to already know it's there to read it. He has been over enemy territory for 2 hours and 11 minutes. He has, by the most conservative estimates available to him through the scratched plexiglass of his canopy, less than 90 minutes of fuel remaining. He is entirely alone. That is the first problem, and it requires a moment of context to understand what alone means at 31,000 feet over Germany in October 1944. And in the 3 years since the United States entered the war, the 8th Air Force has lost more than 26,000 men killed in action over Europe. The average life expectancy of a P-51 pilot in combat is statistically more favorable than that of a bomber crew member. The fighter pilot has the advantage of speed, maneuverability, and the absence of a fixed formation altitude to fly. But these statistics are computed across the full distribution of engagements. They average in the uneventful escort missions, the patrols over quiet sectors, the days when the Luftwaffe stays on the ground. They do not fully account for the specific situation in which Thomas Gallagher now finds himself, separated from his flight, low on fuel, over defended territory, alone. In this specific situation, the statistics are considerably less favorable. In the second problem, and this is the one that will define the next 4 minutes of his life, and every 4 minutes of his life that comes after, is the 5 Focke-Wulf 190s forming up 2,000 feet above him, rolling into a coordinated diving attack from his 10 o'clock, their broad radial engine silhouettes unmistakable against the pale October sky. 5 against 1, the FW-190A8 carries 4 20mm cannons and 2 13mm machine guns. At close range, inside 200 yards, a single 1-second burst can destroy a P-51. At the ranges these German pilots are setting up, all 5 of them coordinating on a single isolated Mustang, the probability of survival drops into territory that experienced combat veterans do not discuss at dinner. He has been separated from his flight for 11 minutes, and he is 40 miles east of the bomber stream he was assigned to escort. The bombers, B-17 Fortresses of the 91st Bomb Group, are already inbound to their target, the synthetic oil refinery at Mersburg, one of the most heavily defended industrial sites in the entire Third Reich. Gallagher's flight had been vectored north to engage a pair of Bf-109s harassing a straggling fortress when the radio failed on his number 3 ship. His flight fragmented across a 60-mile box of contested airspace, and the clouds closed over the rendezvous point at 28,000 feet like a gray curtain being drawn. He had tried to climb above them. Irish Rose had obliged. At 31,000 feet, the outside air temperature reads -52 degrees Celsius. The P-51D's Merlin engine, a Packard-built V-16507, with 1,695 horsepower at war emergency power, has been running at high cruise for nearly 2.5 hours. The supercharger whistles. The airframe shudders in the thin air with the particular vibration Gallagher has learned to read the way a sailor reads water. At this altitude, a standard-weight P-51D requires 155 miles per hour indicated airspeed just to remain airborne. The margin between flying and falling is thin enough to feel. He has 6.50 caliber M2 Browning machine guns, 1,880 rounds total. He has his gun sight. He has a radio that may or may not be functioning. His calls to his flight produced silence, and he cannot know if the silence is theirs or his. He has 41 missions of experience, and somewhere in the accumulated weight of those missions, something that is not quite calculation and not quite instinct, but lives in the space between them. The 5 FW-190s begin their dive. Standard German tactical doctrine as taught to pilots of JG-4, Jagdgeschwader 4, the fighter wing defending the Merseburg-Leipzig sector. Calls for a coordinated diving attack from above and behind, with the formation splitting to deny the target any single escape vector. The lead pilot, whose unit markings Gallagher cannot read at this range, is good. He can tell by the geometry of the approach, the way the 5 ships are spacing themselves with professional precision. These are not cadets. These are men who have been doing this for years. Against 5 experienced FW-190 pilots in a coordinated diving attack, the survival manual has no useful entry. Thomas Gallagher pushes the throttle to war emergency power, and he turns into them. Not away. Into them. He pulls the nose up, trading airspeed for altitude, pointing Irish Rose directly at the descending formation, climbing at an angle that the German flight leader, reviewing this moment in a Luftwaffe debriefing room 3 weeks later, will describe as something that made no immediate sense. The closing speed between Gallagher's climbing Mustang and the diving FW-190s becomes catastrophic. Head-on at combined speeds exceeding 600 miles per hour, the engagement window, the narrow slice of time in which guns can bear on a target, collapses to less than 2 seconds. It is the only play available to him, and for 4 of the longest minutes of the air war over Germany it works. This video gives you the story. But the combat blueprint and our free newsletter gives you everything that doesn't fit in a video. Deeper details, forgotten heroes, full tactical breakdowns, stories that'll hit you harder than this one. Free to join. 10 seconds to sign up. Link in the description. First issue is already waiting for you. The first FW-19. Never had a chance to fire. 9:44:30 a.m. Gallagher meets the diving leader head-on at 30,500 feet, closing so fast that the FW-190 pilot, Unteroffizier Werner Drexler, 22 years old, 114 hours of combat time, 14 confirmed kills, has less than 1 second to react. He breaks right. It is the instinctive, trained response. It is the correct response against almost any other tactical situation. Against a Mustang pilot who has already calculated the brake, it is fatal. Gallagher rolls left with the brake, either the negative G pushing him against his shoulder harness, the blood draining from his head in the hard turn, his vision graying at the edges. He has the FW-190 in his sight for 1.2 seconds. He fires 60 rounds of .50 caliber ball and armor-piercing at 280 yards. The FW-190's radial engine erupts in a spray of black smoke and orange flame. Drexler's aircraft rolls inverted and begins to fall. 1 down, 4 remaining. The physics of the head-on pass have scattered the German formation momentarily. At the speeds involved, the 5 FW-190s have been compressed into a geometry that favors close-range gunnery, which should favor the 5 over the 1. But Gallagher has studied the physics of this from the other direction. He knows that a formation designed for coordinated diving attack becomes temporarily disorganized when the target refuses to run. The element leaders must now reacquire, recoordinate, recommit. He is buying time in seconds, but seconds are a currency he will use. 9:45 a.m. The second FW-190 comes at him from his 2 o'clock low, the German pilot pulling hard to cut off the Mustang's turning radius. Gallagher sees it coming. He rolls into the attack, pulls the nose through the horizon, and discovers that at 30,000 feet in war emergency power, his Merlin is producing a high-pitched harmonic he has not heard before. A vibration in the stick that travels up his forearm and tells him something in the engine is working harder than it should. He files it and keeps turning. The second FW-190, flown by Oberfeldwebel Klaus Naumann, 26, a veteran of the Eastern Front, the African campaign, and 31 months of unbroken combat flying, opens fire at 300 yards. The cannon shells bracket Irish Rose. 2 rounds of 20 millimeters strike the left wing root. Gallagher feels the impacts as physical shocks, 2 hard punches through the airframe. The left aileron becomes heavy. Not dead, heavy. The fine motor control he depends on for precise deflection shooting is now fighting a wing that wants to drag. He fires back. Naumann's aircraft takes hits in the tail section and left elevator. Not destroyed, damaged. Naumann breaks off and descends toward the clouds at 22,000 feet, trailing a thin gray smoke. He is out of the fight. 2 down, or effectively down, 3 remaining, and Gallagher's aircraft is now bleeding. The fuel gauge shows 87 gallons in the fuselage tank, and the wing hits have not ruptured the self-sealing fuel cells. He can confirm this because there is no fire and no smell of gasoline through his oxygen mask. But the left aileron's resistance means he is burning more energy to hold coordinated flight. His energy budget, already strained at high altitude after 2.5 hours of flying, is contracting. 9:46 a.m. The remaining 3 FW-190s reform. Gallagher can see them in his mirrors and through the top of his canopy as he climbs after the engagement, trading his last airspeed for altitude, buying height because height is everything. The German flight leader. He can now identify the man by the bright yellow wingtip markings. The designation of a section leader in JG4 is making the adjustment. He has watched one of his men die and another limp away, and he is not going to let the remaining formation repeat the same mistake. The 3 FW-190s split. 1 high, 1 low, 1 directly behind. This is the classic 3-axis trap. There is no turn that defeats all 3 simultaneously. Pick any escape vector and 2 of the guns will bear on you. It is textbook German fighter tactics, and it is being executed by men who have done it before against other pilots who ran out of answers. Gallagher does not run out of answers, but he comes very close. He pulls into the high FW-190 first. The instinct of a man who has learned that the enemy above you will kill you before the enemy below. The high FW-190 pilot, Lieutenant Friedrich Meyer, 20 years old and 23 combat missions, young, less experienced than the others, and given the high position precisely because it is theoretically the safest. Panics slightly at the Mustang climbing directly toward him with guns firing, and breaks too early, too hard, losing position. His cannon fire goes wide right. Gallagher takes the deflection shot in a 2-second window. Mayer's left wing root erupts in flame. The FW-190 rolls uncontrollably and enters a spin. Mayer is seen to bail out at approximately 24,000 feet. 3 down, 9:47 a.m. Now the last 2 have him, and there is no more formation to scatter. The flight leader and his wingman are experienced, and they are furious, and they are 30 yards apart in a combat spread that gives Gallagher nowhere to hide. And if you want to see what Thomas Gallagher does in the next 60 seconds, how one man with a damaged wing and a complaining engine and 63 rounds remaining per gun finds a way to survive what the Luftwaffe flight leader will later describe in a prisoner of war interview conducted by American intelligence officers in May 1945 as something that should not have been possible. Then hit that like button. It tells YouTube that forgotten stories like this one deserve to be found. Subscribe if you haven't already. Back to Gallagher. The flight leader, his name pieced together from Luftwaffe records and post-war testimony, is Hauptmann Ernst Braun, 29 years old, 186 combat missions, 22 confirmed kills. Is not making the same mistake a third time. He and his wingman, Unteroffizier Horst Weller, are coming at Gallagher from a shallow angle, not diving, denying him the energy advantage that a vertical pass creates. They're going to grind him down. Fuel, ammunition, airspeed, altitude. Braun has done the same math Gallagher has done, and he knows that time is running out for the American. What Braun does not know, cannot know, is that Irish Rose's left aileron heaviness has been teaching Gallagher something for the past 3 minutes. A heavy aileron changes your roll rate. It changes the geometry of your turn. And if you understand how your own aircraft is broken, you can use the brokenness against someone who expects a normal aircraft. Gallagher rolls left, hard left, using the heavy aileron as a feature rather than a flaw, letting the Mustang skid slightly through the turn in a way that no technically sound aircraft would do, creating a deflection angle that Braun's targeting solution, built on the assumption of a normally flying P-51, does not account for. Braun's cannon fire passes 18 feet behind Irish Rose's tail. Gallagher fires into Weller's aircraft at 220 yards, half a second of trigger time, and Weller's engine stops. The FW-190 glides east, trailing white glycol smoke, its pilot alive but out of the fight. 4 down, 1 left. Ernst Braun, 186 missions, 22 kills, is alone above central Germany with 1 round left in his moral ledger and a P-51 that has, in the past 4 minutes, killed or driven off 4 of his colleagues. He does not run. You do not get to 186 missions by running. He rolls back into the fight. Gallagher sees him coming and knows with the particular clarity of a man who has nothing left to conserve, in that there is 1 maneuver remaining, 1 play in the geometry. He has used every trick his 41 missions have given him. He has used the head-on pass, the chandelle, the aileron drag reversal. He is at 29,800 feet with 118 miles per hour indicated airspeed, a shuddering airframe, and a German pilot who has enough experience to recognize what the Mustang's erratic flight means. What Braun does not know, and this is the thing Gallagher will spend the rest of his life finding it difficult to explain, is that Irish Rose in her damaged state is now doing something that a structurally intact P-51 cannot do. The partially severed aileron cable creates a roll coupling, a tendency for the aircraft to yaw and roll simultaneously in a way that is aerodynamically incorrect, that no targeting solution built on a normal P-51's flight envelope will predict. The aircraft is broken in a very specific and, as it turns out, useful way. Gallagher has spent the past 4 minutes learning how it is broken. He is the only person alive who knows. He pulls into the chandelle and waits for Braun to commit. 9:48 a.m. Gallagher has 63 rounds remaining per gun. His left aileron is still heavy. His fuel reads 74 gallons. The Merlin's harmonic vibration has not worsened, but it has not improved. He is 42 miles east of the bomber stream. He is 290 miles from his base at Leiston, England. And Ernst Braun is turning for a final pass. The two men orbit each other for 40 seconds. 40 seconds that feel in Gallagher's cockpit like something outside normal time. He can see the FW-190 clearly. In the black fuselage bands, the yellow section leader wingtips, the mottled gray-green camouflage of a German aircraft that has been repainted more than once, patched, used hard. A working machine flown by a working professional. Gallagher is low on everything. He needs to end this and go home. Braun commits to his pass at 9:48:40 a.m., a high-side attack from the left. The direction of Gallagher's damaged aileron, the German pilot intuiting that the Mustang's turn rate to the left is compromised. It is the right call. In any other engagement it would work. Gallagher does not turn left. He turns right, reverses, and cuts inside Braun's radius at the top of a chandelle. A climbing turn that bleeds his last reserve of airspeed down to 118 miles per hour indicated the absolute edge of controllable flight at this altitude, and the kind of maneuver that the P-51 operating manual describes as inadvisable above 25,000 feet. He is at 29,800 feet. The P-51 shudders. The left wing drops. For half a second, Irish Rose is on the edge of a high-altitude stall and spin from which no pilot has ever recovered. The half-second passes. Gallagher fires one burst of less than 2 seconds, 120 rounds total across 6 guns, into Ernst Braun's aircraft at a range of 190 yards. The FW-190's engine comes apart. Braun survives. He is seen by Gallagher through his canopy mirror as he pushes the nose down and begins the long descent toward friendly territory. To bail out at approximately 18,000 feet, his parachute opening normally. He will spend the remaining 7 months of the war on the ground, recovering from burns to his left hand and a shoulder injury sustained during the bailout. 5 FW-190s in 4 minutes and 14 seconds. 9:49 a.m. Thomas Gallagher is alone above Germany with 67 gallons of fuel, a damaged wing, a complaining engine, and 290 miles of hostile airspace between himself and England. He begins the calculation that will occupy every one of his remaining cognitive resources for the next 2 hours. Fuel flow at cruise power, approximately 50 gallons per hour at altitude. Distance to the coast of Holland, 220 miles at his current position. Estimated fuel remaining on arrival, critical. The North Sea crossing adds another 90 miles to Leiston. He is not going to make Leiston. 10:03 a.m. He crosses the Rhine River at 22,000 feet, descending to conserve fuel, on the engine vibration settling into something that has become familiar enough to be almost reassuring. Below him, the patchwork geometry of occupied Holland, flat, green, cut by canals dotted with farmhouses, whose inhabitants cannot see the silver aircraft high overhead, but whose radio operators and German garrison commanders certainly can. The Rhine crossing is a landmark in 2 senses. Geographically, it means he is in occupied territory rather than Reich territory, which changes the calculus of bailout if the engine quits. Not safer exactly, but different. And psychologically it is a line. He has crossed the Rhine going west, and that means something. His oxygen supply is reading low. At 22,000 feet, he is still above the altitude where hypoxia becomes a serious risk. The threshold is approximately 14,000 feet without supplemental oxygen. but the partial pressure at altitude means he will need to descend within the next 20 minutes, regardless of fuel arithmetic. He adjusts his descent rate to 600 feet per minute, splitting the difference between his oxygen situation and his fuel situation, the two competing constraints that define every minute of the flight home. The Merlin's harmonic vibration, the sound he first noticed during the engagement, the frequency that rides up through the rudder pedals and into the base of his spine, has settled into something he can describe later as a conversation. The engine talking to him, telling him it is tired but not done. He has spent 3 years learning to read aircraft, and he reads this one the way you read the face of someone you know well, not in the words, but in the spaces between them. He switches to the emergency frequency. Nothing. The radio is working. He can hear the carrier wave, but either no one is monitoring or he is out of range or both. 10:31 a.m., the Dutch coast. The North Sea, gray and enormous, stretching west toward England. He has 31 gallons remaining. He is at 12,000 feet, descending at 500 feet per minute to stretch the fuel. The coast of England, a blue-gray line at the absolute limit of visibility. The Merlin's vibration has increased slightly. He does not think about what it means. He thinks about the fuel gauge and the altimeter and the horizon. 10:58 a.m. He crosses the English coast at 3,200 feet over the Suffolk shoreline near Dunwich, 14 miles south of Leiston, and the fuel gauge reads empty. The Merlin is running on vapor and whatever grace operates above the laws of aeronautics. He can see the runway at Leiston. He calls the tower on emergency frequency, and this time someone answers. He lands Irish Rose at 11:04 a.m. The engine stops on the taxiway. He has used every gallon that was in the tanks and at least some gallons that were not. The ground crew who reached the aircraft first count 7 20mm cannon strike marks in the left wing root and tail section. The left aileron cable is 40% severed. The Merlin's number 3 cylinder has a crack in the sleeve that, on inspection, the crew chief describes as something he has never seen on an engine that was still running. Thomas Gallagher climbs down from the cockpit. He is 24 years old. He weighs 161 pounds. His hands, even when he removes his gloves, are shaking. He asks about his flight. Second Lieutenant Raymond Kowalski, 22 years old, from Hamtramck, Michigan, Gallagher's wingman number 2 in the flight, had been vectored north with Gallagher when the flight divided. When the radio failure on number 3 ship fragmented the section and the clouds closed, Kowalski stayed with Gallagher through the initial turn. They were separated in the cloud layer at 28,000 feet. Kowalski was last seen by Second Lieutenant Marco Del Vecchio, 23, of Providence, Rhode Island, number 3 ship, turning east, his aircraft apparently intact. Kowalski did not return to Leiston on October 7th. He did not return on the 8th. In the weeks that followed, either the 357th Fighter Group's intelligence section pieced together what happened from Dutch partisan reports, and eventually from Luftwaffe loss records captured after the war. Kowalski's P-51, Detroit Dream, named for the city where his mother worked in a Chrysler plant, was shot down by German flak over the Ruhr Valley at approximately 9:51 a.m. His aircraft went down 10 miles east of Arnhem. He did not bail out. He was 22 years old. Second Lieutenant Patrick Hennessy, 23, of South Boston, Massachusetts, number 4 ship, the last man in the flight, went down fighting. Del Vecchio, who survived and returned to Leiston at 10:22 a.m., had watched Hennessy engage a pair of Bf-109s over the cloud layer northeast of Cologne. Hennessy had scored hits on both. He was then struck by cannon fire from a third Bf-109 that neither man had seen. His aircraft caught fire. Del Vecchio called his name on the radio 4 times. There was no answer. Hennessy's P-51, Boston Mike, a name that required no explanation to anyone who knew him, went into the clouds, burning. Patrick Hennessy's body was recovered by German authorities and buried with military honors at a small cemetery near Aachen. He was 23 years old. He had been in England for 4 months. Marco Del Vecchio landed at least in 90 minutes before Gallagher, having made it back on an arrow-straight course with no diversions and no engagements. He was sitting on the revetment wall when Gallagher taxied past. He raised one hand. Gallagher raised one hand back. Neither man spoke until the debriefing, and the debriefing lasted 3 hours. At the 357th Fighter Group Intelligence Section, Major Howard Chambers recorded Gallagher's account of the engagement with the systematic efficiency of a man who has heard extraordinary things before and has developed a professional relationship with astonishment. When Gallagher finished, Chambers reviewed his notes, looked up and said, 5 confirmed in 4 minutes and 14 seconds. That's going to need corroboration. Chambers knew something about extraordinary claims and the paperwork they generated. He had been with the 357th since its activation, had processed the claims of John England and Bud Anderson and Chuck Yeager, all men whose combat records read at first encounter like typographical errors. He was not a man who embellished, and he was not a man who dismissed. He was a man who followed the evidence. The evidence, in this case, took 3 weeks to fully assemble. The B-17 crews of the 91st Bomb Group approaching Mersburg from the southwest had observed a contrail engagement at high altitude to the northeast, 5 aircraft going down in rapid succession, 1 aircraft climbing. And from the German side, JG4 loss records eventually confirmed the destruction of 1 FW-190 and the battle damage of 3 others in the Saal Valley sector on the morning of October 7th. Ernst Braun's after-action report, filed from a hospital near Leipzig, described his engagement with an American Mustang pilot in terms that the 357th Fighter Group would circulate internally for years. The report read, in part, the American pilot showed no sign that he understood what situation he was in. He fought as though numbers meant nothing. I've not seen anything like it in 186 missions. Thomas Gallagher was hospitalized for 2 days. Not for wounds, but for exhaustion and the physiological effects of extended high-altitude flight. His hands stopped shaking on the 2nd day. He was back in the air on October 12th. He completed his combat tour in December 1944, finishing with 53 missions. He was promoted to captain before his return to the United States. Irish Rose was repaired. The Merlin was replaced. The left aileron cable was replaced. The aircraft flew 14 more combat missions before the war ended, piloted by 3 different men, none of whom knew what had happened over the Saal Valley on an October morning. The name remained on the fuselage through all of it. White cursive letters below the cockpit rail, small enough that you had to already know they were there to read them. The aircraft was scrapped at a salvage depot in England in the summer of 1945. The name went with it. Some things do not survive the peace. Thomas Andrew Gallagher returned to Bridgeport, Connecticut in February 1945. He enrolled at the University of Connecticut on the GI Bill and studied civil engineering, graduating in 1949. He worked for 31 years as a structural engineer for the state of Connecticut. eventually becoming the senior supervising engineer for bridge construction in the Northeastern District. He married Margaret O'Brien of New Haven in 1950. They had 4 children. He did not talk about the war for a long time. He talked about it eventually, when his children were old enough, when the anniversaries accumulated enough weight, and when the veterans' organizations began writing down what they could before the men who remembered were gone. He described the engagement over the Sayal Valley not as heroism, but as arithmetic. "I couldn't go home without going through them," he said in an interview recorded by the 357th Fighter Group Association in 1987. "So I went through them. The arithmetic was simple. The doing of it was harder." Marco Del Vecchio returned to Providence after the war, joined his father's construction business, and built it into one of the largest general contractors in Rhode Island. He and Gallagher exchanged Christmas cards every year from 1945 until Del Vecchio's death in 2009 at the age of 88. They attended every 357 fighter group reunion they could reach. At the final reunion, either of them attended Kansas City in 2001. They sat together at the dinner table and did not speak very much, which was, by then, the fluent language of men who have been through the same unrepeatable thing. Raymond Kowalski was posthumously awarded the Air Medal. His mother, Stella Kowalski, attended the ceremony at Selfridge Field, Michigan in June 1945. She kept the medal on her mantelpiece for the rest of her life. She died in 1979. The medal passed to Raymond's younger brother, Walter, who donated it to the Michigan Aviation Hall of Honor in 2003. Patrick Hennessy was posthumously awarded the Air Medal and the Purple Heart. His mother, Bridget Hennessy, received the medals at a ceremony in Boston. She attended Mass every Sunday for the next 40 years at St. Bridget's in South Boston, in the pew where Patrick had sat beside her every Sunday until he shipped out. She kept his last letter in her missal until the pages fell apart. Thomas Gallagher retired from the state of Connecticut in 1981. He spent his retirement sailing Long Island Sound, tending a vegetable garden, and attending the funerals of men he had flown with. He died on March 14, 2003, at the age of 82. The obituary in the Bridgeport Post ran 4 paragraphs and mentioned his engineering career and his family. It did not mention the Sayal Valley. It did not mention the 5 FW-190s. It did not mention the morning when one P-51 turned into 5 aircraft and came out the other side. Some things do not fit in 4 paragraphs. That is why we are here. If this story moved you the way it moved us, do me a favor. Hit that like button. Every single like tells YouTube to show this story to more people. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We're rescuing forgotten stories from dusty archives every single day. Stories about ordinary men who faced impossible arithmetic and did the math anyway. Real people. Real courage, real sacrifice. Drop a comment right now and tell us where you're watching from. Are you watching from the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, Poland, Germany? Our community stretches across the entire world, and that matters, because the stories we tell belong to all of us. Tell us your location. Tell us if someone in your family served. Tell us if you've stood at a grave that had a name on it you almost didn't know. Just let us know you're here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for making sure Thomas Gallagher and the men of White Flight 357th Fighter Group don't disappear into silence. Raymond Kowalski died alone over the Ruhr Valley at 9:51 a.m. on October 7, 1944. His aircraft went straight in. He was 22 years old. Patrick Hennessy burned for 30 seconds above the clouds over Germany, and then he was gone. He was 23 years old. They never came home. But the two men who survived carried their memory forward through 50 years of reunions, of letters, of sitting together in hotel banquet halls in Kansas City and Tucson and Colorado Springs, growing old in the company of the only people who fully understood. And now, through this story, and their names live on, these men deserve to be remembered, and you're helping make that happen. This video gives you the story, but the Combat Blueprint, our free newsletter, gives you everything that doesn't fit in a video. Deeper details, forgotten heroes, full tactical breakdowns, stories that'll hit you harder than this one. Free to join. 10 seconds to sign up. Link in the description. First issue is already waiting for you.